Mitram and Bandhuvam, this is Dr. J. Reddy at South Asia Maps Education channel that brings you South Asian centric history and culture and heritage to you. I also post in other related topics of general interest to my audience. This particular topic is about human ecology, part 38. That is human ecology, human predicament, that is human impasse, a difficult situation that Homo sapiens, Homo colossus today placed himself on the planet Earth. The works are essentially from Dr. Catton's book Overshoot and Bottleneck Century. This is part 38. The title of the presentation is the Liebig's Law of Minimum. In 37, we discussed the Liebig's Law of Minimum. So in the 38, we are expanding law further, applying to the ecological concept of carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum load indefinitely supported by a particular habitat, a country or territory, whether it can support 10 million or 100 million people, the maximum indefinitely. So here we discuss about the carrying capacity, composite carrying capacity of A and carrying capacity B, combined composite carrying capacity, CCP, I abbreviated as a carrying capacity. So this is the Overshoot book. Dr. William Catton Jr. from the United States of America passed away round about 5 or 6 years back. Professor at Washington State University, Pullman, in the Washington State, east of Cascade Mountains, south of 49th parallel. His second book, Bottleneck, and most of the ideas come from the book. And this is the 38th part. See, Liebig's law of minimum. 37 part I talked about Liebig's law of minimum. Liebig's law of minimum 38 is applying the carrying capacity. Third part you will see adjustment to this carrying capacity. Here I have put a bird's eye view of all the ecological presentations in the ecology, human ecology playlist or the bin in the YouTube channel I made, like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. Today's presentation is 38. So like carrying capacity, taking over, drawing down, new world, old world, and ecological acreages, detritus ecosystem, the population from Lincoln's times to Biden in the United States of America, from 35 million people when Lincoln was assassinated, 1865 to Biden around about 2025, and ecological overshoot and diachronic competition, the older generation stealing the resources from current younger generation, that is the competition between different chronological times, very important, cornucopian paradigm, ecological paradigms, two paradigms. The modern people, industrial societies, people are essentially hunters and gatherers, every day hunting for oil, coal, natural gas, iron and so on, just like the traditional hunters and gatherers of the former time before agriculture was invented. Traditional hunters and gatherers. So, adaptations to the changing post-exuberant era, realism, cargoism, cosmetism, we discussed extensively. These three presentations are about the Liebig's law, and this is the my YouTube channel, and I will be putting this particular presentation, South Asia Maps J. Reddy, in the playlist Human Population. These are the playlist. There are around about 30 or so. The playlist and varied diverse topics of the regions Bengal, Punjab, Deccan, and Andhra Pradesh and Northeast Pakistan, the Bangladesh history, the battle. So it will fit almost any of your particular niche or requirement and railway history, and you can go and look them, and there are already nearly 250 60 presentations organized, those 30 or so the playlist. That is the Liebigs, the law of minimum carrying capacity. We are joining them together. Carrying capacity, suppose this is the land, imagine it can support here, let's say I put 4 people. Carrying capacity is nothing but number of people, a habitat, like habitat is a district or a province, as a state or a country, or even entire planet Earth is a habitat. The number CCP is nothing but number of people. Here I put 4. It has to support indefinitely. That is the habitat. So this law was originally, Liebig's law was formulated, as we discussed, just as one Liebig around about 1863, essentially based upon the agriculture chemistry or plant growth, that the growth of the plant is not determined by the abundant nutrients such as phosphorus or sulfur or nitrogen and so on, potash, but the least amount of the resource. That is the minimum, law of minimum, or the bottleneck or determining factor. Carrying capacity is the maximum allowed load. Humans in the habitat for indefinite period of time. That means it has to support, let's say, 10 million people in a particular region indefinitely. That means until the collapse of the planet Earth. That's what it means, indefinite period. Carrying capacity is not limited just by the food supply. Most of the time we think food supply. That is the only, any food supply or any factor, any resource or anything, circumstance can be a carrying capacity limitation, the law of minimum. Any substance, any circumstance which is indispensable for the life to be carried but is present in the very least amount, that is inadequate. Whatever is available in the least amount sets the carrying capacity limit of a habitat. Take for example, this is the Africa, this is the Arabian Peninsula, that is the Hejaz and Najd, the Yemen, Oman, and the Trucial state, that is Kuwait, Bahrain, and all those areas. Here the rainfall is the limiting factor that sets the limit. Historically, before the World War, there used to be 2 to 3 million people lived here because of there is a less rainfall, there is no agriculture. That is the limitation set by the habitat, particular factor. This, the Liebig's law cannot be repealed under any circumstances, but sometimes the law can be made to apply less restrictively, means a lenient. That means suppose if you are going in a traffic in intersection, you cannot cross the red light. Suppose if there is nobody is there, sometimes you can sneak in. That means you are applying that particular law, a stop, at very lenient manner. That's what it is. But the law cannot be repealed. The law cannot be repealed but can be applied less restrictively. People living in the habitat with a shortage of one resource. Take for example here Arabia. Let's say this is a independent nation. Before the World War I, there used to be 3 million people. So that is the habitat, the limitation is there. This is other nation, Australia, and plenty of food is produced along the Murray-Darling River basins, plenty of food. So there are 2 separate habitats. Here there was no cars at that time. Imagine there is no oil discoveries there. Imagine there are only 2 nations on the planet Earth. Here the law of minimum is there is no oil, they cannot run any automobile. There is no food, so they can only rise around about 3 million people. Now that is 2022, there are 80 million people live in this peninsula. Saudi Arabia has around about 30, Yemen has around about 30, and United Arab Emirates, that is Dubai and Abu Dhabi, those areas have around about 10, and Oman and Kuwait, Bahrain and all those areas. Together around about 80 or 90 million people live there. And the carrying capacity of this land, if you join by the trade relations or exchange relations with these two, they can bring the food from here, and there are more people now here. Because there is a plenty of oil here, they can bring the oil and run the automobiles. There are 25 million people. Now there are around about 20 million automobiles in Australia. 25 million people, 90 million people here. So this carrying capacity of Arabia and carrying capacity of Australia, these are the individual carrying capacity. A is Arabia, B for Australia. The combined carrying capacity or composite carrying capacity is much greater. That means even though the Liebig's law of minimum, LLM, applies locally, now it is applied little more liberally. Instead of 3 million, you can have 90 million here, and instead of 0 automobiles, you can have 20 million automobiles here. That means the limitation, the minimum, is not set by locally but set by globally. Imagine there are only 2 countries on the planet Earth. The scarcities are set globally, not locally. The food scarcity here is set globally. This globally, 2 countries, composite or compound, has more food. That means it is not set locally. Imagine the trade relation between these 2 countries broken, or also oil get exhausted or war occurs between these 2. That means no oil will be shipped from Arabian Peninsula to Australia. All the 20 million plus automobiles will come to standstill. That means LLM, the law on the carrying capacity, now applied locally. Because there is no food supply, there are 90 million people, there will be high mortality, has to eventually, very quickly, unfortunately, has to brought down to 3-4 million people that it is used to be. That means the LLM, the Liebig's law, now applies locally instead of globally, because the trade relations are broken, exchange relations are broken. So that's what it is essentially. So we discussed about the Liebig's law of minimum and carrying capacity, the number of the people that can apply. The carrying capacity CCP, this is the composite carrying capacity of these 2 are always greater than the sum of the individual carrying capacity. 2 million here, 0 automobiles. If you brought together 90 million people here, 20 million automobiles. That's very, very important. What is the implication of modern times? Homo sapiens, it's human prodigal, resource-consuming prodigal, Homo colossus, a gigantic human today, is dependent on the Liebig's law applied globally, because every nation in the planet Earth is trading a lot with other nations. In future, whatever may be the reason, if the trade relationships break, the law will be applied locally. That is called economically a recession. When the recession, politically, economically, you call the recession, but essentially, ecologically, if you look at it, recession in any country means now the Liebig's law to the carrying capacity is applied locally. The people in that particular territory now depend upon only the local resources that restricts the carrying capacity limits, CCPs. Restrictions are applied locally rather than the globally, because of war or because of trade restrictions or trade collapses, ultimately due to geological regions. Even though everything is normal, there is no war. If the oil drum on the planet Earth will collapse, that means it depletes. Every day we are consuming almost 100 million barrels of oil. Today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, next 20-30 years, that will come to standstill. That means the most of the socio-political, economical niches, high prosperity, affluence, the homo colossus of industrial nations depend upon this composite carrying capacity, where the restrictions are applied globally, will fall upon locally, and the social consequences will be catastrophic. That's what is very important, and we need to keep in mind and think about alleviating that. Thank you very much. That's what I wanted to discuss today, part 38. And Mitram and Bandhuvam, if you are following me at ShareChat or any other channel, please take some time to post your comment. If you like the presentations and you think they are very valuable in understanding, enhancing your perspective, and to discuss the issues at a very deeper level, and I will really appreciate it. And even if you can subscribe and bring it to the notice of your friends, that will be really appreciated. Thank you very much, and see you later in the third part of Liebig's law of minimum, that is the adjustment, scope adjustment, scope expansion, scope contractions, taking certain the classical economies of some countries. See you later in other presentations. Dr. J. Reddy, South Asia Maps.